two types of anti-Semitism. And that's really a good place to start off with the concept of anti-Semitism. It's the longest hatred in the world. It's really quite fascinating. I know a lot of people like to understand and talk about love and all that represents, and that's a noteworthy and a noble endeavor. But hatred is also a very interesting and widely misunderstood characteristic. There are in Jewish thinking, Jewish philosophy, Jewish ideas, we talk a lot about the emotions. And there's a fascinating idea. It's represented in the famous saying by King Solomon, there's a time for love, there's a time for war, different time for different things. And what he means by that is every emotion, every type of action has a place. In other words, nothing has a universal. Love is not universal. It's good in many places, but there are times where it is counterproductive. So you should love everybody, but there are some exceptions to that rule, and you don't want to love the bad people. So right. So hate, generally speaking, is not a good idea, but there are some people you should hate. Right? You should hate people like Hitler, Stalin. These are people that deserve our antipathy. So so getting back to anti-Semitism. So there was a study done in Chicago University, very interesting study, in which they wanted to study the causes and reasons for hatred in America. And so they did this broad study of the different groups in America that were or are disparaged. And there was 5 different groups, if I remember correctly. I don't have it in front of me. I still have the study in my office somewhere. But it's a fascinating thing. Anybody who's interested in it, please send me a text or an email. I'm happy to send you the link. So there were 5 groups, one of them being Jews, another one was Southern whites, another was Hispanics, another was African Americans, and I think Chinese was the 5th one, don't remember exactly. And they wanted to study like what images they have of these groups. And what they concluded was that all of these groups have disparaging images. In other words, everyone thinks of them as relative to the norm, white America, lazier, live off welfare, prone to crime, things like that. Every one of these, disparaging every one of these groups. That's their image of them, except Jews. With Jews, they viewed them more positively in every one of the criteria, except one, and that was patriotism. Fascinating, really. In other words, when it comes to every other kind of hatred, we understand it. Why do you hate this particular group, whether it's justified or not? People hate them because they view them in a negative light, right? And usually it's not justified. Usually it's just slurs and propaganda and that kind of awful stuff that we've seen going around. So they'll view people in a, and they'll judge the whole people, which is what the essence of racism is. But when it comes to Jews, they do the opposite. When it comes to Jews, they don't view them in a negative light. They view them with things that normally we would consider positive things. They're more hardworking, they're more honest, they're more, and every single characteristic. In other words, anti-Semitism is not the same as racism. Both are scourges of humanity, but they're very different. And because they're different, it's just like this coronavirus. You can't fight coronavirus in the way you fight cancer, let's say, or mental illness or any other illness. You have to know what it is and fight it with its specific thing. So when it comes to racism, we've done a pretty good job. America is on the forefront of this battle to outlaw this this scourge. But when it comes to racism, when it comes to anti-Semitism, you don't help fight anti-Semitism by pointing out how wonderful these people are. And also you can fight racism by saying, no, this group are not lazy. They're the ones that are, they built this and they do that and they're always great and they're smart and et cetera, right? And you promote that image, the opposite. But when it comes to racism, when it comes to anti-Semitism, that doesn't help because the whole fuel of racism is you view them in a positive light. So therefore, telling them how wonderful they are is not the antidote. It just makes it worse. Now, I would not say, oh, so therefore tell them how bad Jews are. No, that's not going to help either. So anyway, so the king gets up and he says, let's deal wisely with people. So in the history of anti-Semitism, they fall under two categories. There are stupid anti-Semites and there are smart anti-Semites. That's how the dice rolls. The two categories, right? The stupid ones are like the Stalins, like the Chomenki, the pogroms. They just come in and they burn and pillage, like the Spanish Inquisition. They just kill everybody. It's a very simple technique, and you either get out of the way in time or you don't, right? The smart ones, they're a dangerous bunch of people, right? That's the Nazis. They were very smart. Like they figured out how to get Jews to get on cattle cars and go to their death. It's a very difficult thing to do, right? They were very smart, right? You obviously don't want to deal with the smart ones, right? If you're dealing with a smart one, you won't know you're in trouble till it's too late. So that's what he says, let's deal wisely with this people. And he says why, and he gives the reason. He says, verse 10, lest they get even bigger, lest they increase, and we'll have a war, and they will join with those who hate us, and they'll wage war. In other words, a fifth column within our own ranks. Very dangerous thing to have, right? During the Second World War, Roosevelt was worried about this very thing with Japanese Americans. In England, they had a very similar kind of thing. They locked up Germans. It was a dangerous time. Whether it's was justified or not is not the issue. The point is, it is something to be afraid of, that within your own ranks you have people sympathetic to the enemy, and it's going to create an awful lot of problems, right? The American Revolution, a significant amount, so to some degree, was helped by people within the ranks of the British Army. So what's his name? I forget his name now. I'm not American, so that's my excuse. Benedict Arnold, I believe, was a spy for he was a British officer and was a spy for the Americans. So, oh no, sorry, the other way around. sorry, got that one wrong. Spy, he was in the American army and a spy for the British. So, Pharaoh is worried that this is going to happen. Now, Rav Shimshon Raphael Hirsch makes a fantastic point. Fantastic point. He first of all, this is not Rav Shimshon Hirsch's point. First of all, he's coming out with his anti-Semitic diatribe. Get the Jews, right? That's what it's about. Get the Jews, right? Are the Jews creating a problem? No. Is there an issue? No. He's positing this may one day be an issue. Like, why do you have to create an issue? In other words, you have a cleaning lady, you have a mechanic, you have an accountant, and you go, maybe one day these people will, who knows what? Yes, maybe one day. I mean, that's for sure true. I mean, if you know, famous quote from Nixon, just because I'm paranoid doesn't mean people are not out to get me. So those things may be true. Right? But if you go around, it's definitely true that we get ripped off from people at one time we trusted. That is true. But that doesn't imply and that doesn't mean that everyone we trust is one day going to rip us off. That's not true. So, but if you go around living your life, that the people who I trust are going to wonder, you never function, you become dysfunctional. And that's unfortunately a lot of the dysfunction of people who are dysfunctional. They suspect everybody. So he's positing a problem that may happen, that may not happen. But his point was why does he do that? Because he hates Jews. He has to give a reason for his hatred. He has to posit something that might happen for which to rally everyone together. It's not a country of anti-Semites. It's a country that they don't have a problem with the Jews. If they all had a problem, he wouldn't have to give a reason. In other words, when the Nazis came up against the Jews, they didn't say why they're against the Jews. They just were. They just hated Jews. They didn't have to come up with some philosophy, some theory of what the Jews would do. In fact, there were many Jews that were fighting for the Germans until they realized, what side what was going on. But the Jews would have fought, the German Jews were on their side until they became until the Nazis were against them. So the Nazis did not have to come up with a reason to go get the Jews because they hated them. Pharaoh has to give a reason because it's in a country that do not hate Jews. He has to posit something. Now, is that what he posits a bit of a stretch? Yes, it is. So there's an empathy towards this idea. The Jews, as much as they are, it's not a tremendously anti-Semitic country. There is a sympathy for this philosophy. But nevertheless, it's an idea that resonates with people. Why? Remember that study from Chicago. The one weakness of the Jewish people is we are not viewed as patriotic. It's our Achilles heel, going all the way back. And that's what Pharaoh says. Then we'll have a war and they will join our enemy because these people are not patriotic. And a very strange thing because Jews, wherever country, the one thing that Jews are very strong at is a sense of patriotism. I grew up in England. The Jews in England, they feel more English than the English. They pride themselves in acclimating with the nation. American Jews, the same thing, and identifying with the values of that nation. So what on earth does he mean? And what on earth does it mean that the Chicago University came to point out that the Jews are unpatriotic? So you see there's two definitions of patriotism. What most people mean by patriotism, they mean my country do or die, my king do or die. Like whatever America, whatever Germany, whatever England, whatever Egypt says to do, by definition is the right thing to do. That's one definition, and that's the common definition of patriotism. But Jews have a different definition, which is get the country to do the right thing because that's the best thing for the country. That's the Jewish definition of patriotism. A lot of people don't like that. Now, there's a subtle difference. There's a slight variation on that theme, which is get the country to live by the ideals to which it stands for. It's along the same lines as that first idea. But those two ideas are the Jewish understanding of patriotism, which often leads it in conflict with the people in charge, because Jews stand up and say, this is not the right way to behave. In fact, the Jews are very much involved in movements that focus the country on what it believes, what they believe are the values of the society. ACLU, right? NAACP was funded by Jews. Martin Luther King, his right-hand man was Jewish. He was because backer was a Jew, a guy named Levinson. There's a lot of Jews involved in the civil rights movement because of this idea, and because of that, we get the criticism that we're not patriotic. So getting back now to Pharaoh, the Pharaoh comes up with this thing: the Jews may join the war. So getting into Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch's point, and the whole theme of today's session is first impressions. Hirsch asks a question. He says he's coming out with this diatribe, a very far-fetched scenario. Maybe there would be a war, and maybe the Jews will join with our enemies and fight against us. Like, really? That's the best you can come up with? Why does he say the Jews are crooks? Why does he say the Jews are thieves? Why does he say the Jews are liars? Why does he say the Jews, you can't trust them? And Hirsch says the reason he couldn't say that is because he never met a Jew by which he could say such a thing. It never happened. Now, did he meet every Jew? So I want to tell you a story. Fascinating story. Told of a friend of mine, lives in Washington. His name is Dennis Berman. Now, Dennis is a great guy, big tzaddik, and one day he gets a call from a guy he never heard of. And the guy says to him, I heard this story directly from his sister-in-law. His sister-in-law told me the story. And I asked Dennis if it's true. So this guy calls him up and he says to him, I want to thank you for saving my life. So Dennis says, I don't know who you are. He says, I know, but you saved my life. He says, how did I save your life? So he said, well, I had an appointment with somebody who was collecting money for a charity. And the guy calls me up on the day of the appointment, about 15 minutes before we're supposed to meet. And he says to me, listen, I'm supposed to meet with you at this time, and I can't find a parking spot for love nor money. I'm supposed to meet with you, I forget the time, whatever it was, 9 o'clock, whatever the time was. I'm supposed to meet with you at that time, but I can't get a parking spot. Since I've got you for that time, I mean, really, he didn't use these words, but the implication was, you owe me this hour, right? And since we've got the time, I'm scheduled for that time. Instead of meeting in your office, would you mind if we met in my car? I mean, what difference does it make to you, right? Save me driving around, panicking and whatever, right? Let's meet in my car. And the guy's thinking to himself, what a loser. Like, if you're going to meet with someone who's going to request from you funding for a charity, the last thing you want to do is meet in the guy's car. I mean, maybe it's not the last thing, but it's close to the last thing. Like really, you're going to meet with the guy in his car? This is the best you can come up with? But nevertheless, the guy was right. He did owe him the appointment. He put the time in to make the appointment. He promised he would meet with him, so he felt as a sense of duty, okay, I'll meet with you in your car, right? So he gets there, comes downstairs, right? And he's sitting in the car. And while he's sitting in the car, the plane hits his building. His office was in the Twin Towers in Manhattan. And the plane hits his building right where his office was. Right? That was it. He's looking at his death. And like, oh my goodness. Right? Crazy. So after he calms down a little bit, he turns to the guy and he says, I gotta ask you a question. Like, when you have an appointment for somebody, I mean, if you hadn't done that, I'd be dead now. But when you have an appointment with somebody and you can't make the appointment, especially when it's something sensitive like asking him for support, financial support, and you can't make the appointment, what you normally do is you call the guy up and say, listen, I'm not going to appoint with you at this time. I can't get a parking spot. Can we reschedule for an hour, 2 hours, whatever, tomorrow? Right? And I got the appointment and they go, okay, I'm moving around. Right? We'll see what we can do. You don't ask the guy to come sit in his car. What made you think that? And he said, well, I'm coming from Israel and I've never fundraised in America before. And the first person I went to meet was Dennis Berman. The first person I went to meet was Dennis Berman. And Dennis treated me so nicely. He was so friendly and so helpful. And he treats everyone like that, whether he helps them or he doesn't help them. He's so nice, so respectful, so helpful. I thought every rich American was like this. They're all like this. That's why I thought it was my first impression. I thought it must be they're all like this. So I figured if Dennis is like that, you must be like that too, and you wouldn't mind, because Dennis wouldn't have minded. So the guy calls up Dennis and says, because you treated this man this way, you saved my life. And then he added, if you ever want to see me, just show up. Do not make an appointment. Right? That's the power of first impressions. Pharaoh did not meet a crook. He did not meet a Jew who was a crook. That's was his impressions. If that was who he met, therefore they're all like this. Yes, they have a problem with patriotism, but everything else, they're stellar. That's how important it is. First, you might be the first redhead. You might be the first Englishman. You might be the first whoever, the first Jew, the first whatever, that someone's going to meet, and they're going to have an impression, the first American, and therefore they're going to have, that's what they're going to imagine, that's how powerful that first impression is. As the saying goes, you never get a second chance to make a first impression, but that's why first impressions are so important, that you don't want to have to go make a second impression and undo the mistake you made, because it gets right in there. It's a very powerful thing. So Rabbi Weinberg, Rabbi Noach, he adds on this. He says, Pharaoh said this idea, that there's going to be a war, and the Jews are going to join our enemies and be the fifth column. He says, he could say much simpler than that. They're going to start a civil war. You don't have to wait till they meet, and then enjoy them. Just say you're going to have a civil war. And he says in the Haggadah, we read every Passover, the Haggadah says that, for those who are not familiar, the document that we read, the story we read on Passover night. And in there it says that if God had not taken us out of Egypt, we'd still be there till today. And he says, what are you talking about still with it? The English had a revolution. The French had a revolution. The Americans had a revolution. It's not in that order, right? The British were first, the Americans second, the French third, right? Many countries had civil wars, and where the people rose up and they overcame, right? Libya just had one. It's not an uncommon thing, right? Why would they still be there? Smart people, they'd still be there. He says, because if something hasn't been done, you wouldn't think of it. You have to have an experience. I always use this as an example, sort of beating a dead horse here. But when Roger Bannister ran the 4-minute mile in 1954, no one in recorded running had ever done such a thing. In almost 100 years, no one had done it. Within a year of him doing it, people were running faster than him. I met a guy who did it in high school. Now, in his day, it was like the biggest news of the year. It was like man landing on the moon. That's how big it was. But within a year, people were running fast. Now it won't even get the local newspaper. You can't even tweet about it. I just ran the 4-minute mile. It's no big deal. But he asked the question, like, how could, if it took 100 years to people to do it, There were some people who thought it was impossible. People couldn't run that fast. It took 100 years for the first guy, because the second guy, now it's in the realm of possibility. Until it's done, you can't imagine such a thing. And if you can't imagine, now Henry Ford said, the people who think you can and the people who think you can't are 100% right. If you think you can't, you can't. If you think you can, you can. That's how it works. So up until this point, no one had a civil war. It had not ever happened. And therefore, Pharaoh could not conceive of this idea that you could have a civil war, because the truth of the matter is, it's no small thing to pull off a civil war. You have no way of very difficult way of organizing, no real armaments, no real. You're surrounded everywhere. It's not. A war is to win to fight against another country. You need another country of equal power or similar power to fight the first country. Here you've got a ragtag bunch of people inside the country going to take on the whole country. That's absurd. If it wasn't the fact that it happens, we wouldn't think it would be possible. And that's what Pharaoh's dealing with. He can't imagine such a thing, and neither could the Jews imagine such a thing. That's why it took such a long time, as we're going to see, of inculcating in them the idea that such a thing is possible. And because the Jews did it, it allowed every society since then the possibility, which is an amazing thing. Because without that, governments would not be afraid of their own people. Or maybe a better way of saying that is, it's the fear of this that forces governments to give rights and listen to their people. We see this in companies. I'm not going to name names. I'm somewhat tempted, but I'm not going to name names. Right? But if you're mistreated, it's often from the companies that have monopolies. They're big companies, and you're a small guy, and they feel they can mistreat you. Well, a government is worse than that, and because of the fear of the people, that forces the government to take the people seriously. Which is it's an amazing change in society. The Torah points this out, that brings this idea, because it has had a tremendous effect on all the countries of the world. So that's our lesson for today. Everyone, please be safe.